Hey there everybody, it's Nathan Cool, and in this episode I'm going to be reviewing a new type of 360 camera for doing virtual tours. It's the Trisio Lite 2. You can see right here it's about the same size as a Ricoh Theta Z1, so that's why I'm going to be comparing it to, but also it's unique in that it rotates by itself. So it brings into question, well, could you also do this with a DSLR? So I'm going to be comparing it against that as well. It's got some very unique features to it. I was quite surprised with some of it, but of course sometimes these portable 360 cameras are just not always the best quality. So how does it rank up to one of the leaders right now in doing these portable 360 cameras, which is the Ricoh Theta Z1? So I'm going to start breaking that down from top to bottom, from price, the features, how you would operate it, and then the final results as well. Let's get started. So on the left over here, we've got the new Trisio Lite 2. This is a Ricoh Theta Z1. Definitely about the same size footprint, but there is a difference in price. The Trisio, that'll cost you just about $400, but the Z1 is $1,000. That's a very high in demand camera. Now, one of the reasons why this is also a lot more expensive, it's got a very compact footprint and other features. So let's take a look here. If we spin this around, we can see that's a typical dual fisheye with a 1-inch sensor on both sides. So it's a very hefty, it's a little bit heavier too than the Trisio because of that, but for $1,000 it's a little bit of a pricey investment for just a portable camera. But moving on here to the products themselves though, Trisio is different in that it doesn't have that dual fisheye lens. It has just the single lens here, and you can see it's a little smaller, but it does a really good job, but there's nothing on the back of it. That means that this thing has to rotate. And I'm going to show you how that actually works in just a second. Now, when we start ranking the quality of the pictures, we're going to see some of those results in a second. But when we take a look at the Ricoh Theta Z1, the finished panos are 6720 wide by 3360. But when we get over to the Trisio, it's definitely got a little bit more megapixels at 8000 wide and 4000 high when we're looking at the finished panorama. Next though, to really see how this works, let's get in closer and then start the app so you can see from start to finish how this works compared to using a Ricoh Theta Z1. So over here, I'm going to be placing eventually the screen capture to show how to use the app while you're using the Trisio, because it's very unique, but I wanted to show you something that's unique. You have options to turn the sound on and off. When you do turn on the sound, you put this little start button on the side over here. It sings a little song to you, and then here in a second, it'll tell you that the battery's high. So it tells you the battery power, and it's stuff you can also see in the app itself. So this is the app for the Trisio Lite 2, and when you first enter it, you just hit the center button, and it's going to tell you that you need to connect. I wish it did have an auto connect, but it's pretty simple in Wi-Fi, so we just go over there to our settings. Then I have to go over here to my Wi-Fi settings. You can see my router's Cool and Luke 5. There's Trisio down here. We click on Trisio. It has a default password of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 if you do need to connect it for the first time. Once that's connected, then you can go back to the app and then you can enter. You can see it now is connected. So now I'm going to go in there and you can see it's watching me doing my thing and recording what I'm doing. So I'll move out of here so I'm not the star player here in what's going on. Now, what's going to happen as we're recording this is you're going to see that it will do a few different things. Let's go ahead and just press start. So the first thing it does, it resets the camera. Starts moving it around a little bit, starts seeing where things are, and it starts metering the amount of light that it needs. Now it starts taking pictures, and it's going to take 4. There's our first one at the bottom. Then it moves to its second position. You see that camera rotating to second position. Now it's rotating to its third position to take that photo, and then it'll rotate finally to its fourth position to take that photo as well. If you ever wanted to see behind the scenes of how I light things, there you go. It's right there. Once it does that, then it has to read the camera photo, it has to start the panoramic stitching, and then eventually save that panoramic image. And you can see for taking just one shot, this is taking a while to do all the metering, the 4 shots around. But that's okay, because this is now one and done. There is no other editing involved. There's no other requirement for stitching. What happened here was, after that stitching was accomplished and that processing then was done with the application on whatever device you were running that app. In this case, it was my iPad. It could have been your iPhone or whatever, but it's all done for you. Then afterwards, you can download it from your device to your computer then to make your virtual tour. In this case, it was nice in that using my iPad connected to my Apple account, it then uploaded it and backed it up into iCloud, and then I could have then later on just downloaded it from iCloud to my computer to then make my virtual tour. Now looking at the results, what I've done is I've shot the exact same 360 panorama using 3 different cameras. I've got this on a website, so you can take a look at the results for yourself, and I have a link to this down in the description for the video, so you can peruse around through here, go into the details, and compare the 3 yourself. I also have links to other virtual tour videos that I have on my YouTube site. They'll be related to some of what I'll be talking about here, as well as other information that you might find useful regarding this. And of course, there are links to the Trisio camera as well. Up here, when you're browsing this, if you're seeing it on a phone, you'll probably see this menu collapse up at the top. So you want to expand that, and then you've got the 3 choices. And what we have here is we've got the Trisio Lite 2, and then we've got the Ricoh Theta Z1, and then I used a DSLR using HDR. Now, this is using a pano head, and it was using a Nikon D610 with a Samyang 12mm fisheye on a Nodal Ninja pano head. And as you know from my other videos and throughout my books, I talk about using that for some of the high-end virtual tours where you do have to rotate 4 around, doing that 90 degrees and possibly shoot a zenith. On the DSLR one here, I didn't shoot a zenith, so it's blank, because I was just looking at what would this look like for quality, not getting too far in depth with also then getting rid of the nadir. So this just gives us a comparison, and I'm going to get into more of this versus Trisio, because you start comparing the 2 together since they have to do that rotation of 4 shots around. Which one's faster, which one's least expensive, which one gives you the quality that you need for a virtual tour. So let's start looking at the Trisio Lite 2, and the biggest thing here is to compare it really against the Ricoh Theta Z1. Remember that the Trisio is only about $400 and the Z1 is about $1,000. When we go back and forth between these, we can immediately see just from this angle, besides when we go and rotate around, which I'll do some comparison here in just a little bit, when we look straight on, we can already see some differences between it and the Ricoh Theta Z1. So the Trisio, even though it is using a smaller sensor than the Ricoh Theta Z1, it is coming out with a bit better quality. It is sharper, it's less hazy. Now remember, what we're doing here is comparing the Z1 to the Trisio, apples to apples, that they're both producing a JPEG that was HDR'd by the device itself. In the case of the Ricoh Theta Z1, that was done in device. In the case of the Trisio, Trisio does that in the app on whatever device you're using. In this case, it was my iPad. Anyways, going in here close to take a look at a few details, we can see here that on the Trisio, there is some purple fringing that is up here around these windows. There was a lot of light that was coming in. Looking at the Theta Z1, we do have also some similar fringing around there, so that's pretty much about the same as what you'd get, and you could reduce some of that possibly if you needed to in post-processing. But when we turn around and we start looking back here, we can start seeing some other noticeable differences. There's a lot of sunlight that's coming in here through the back door, and so we can see a lot of haze and bloom that's come around here. When we compare that to the Ricoh Theta Z1 and we rotate around, that bloom is just worse. It's atrocious. Now, we do have more color that came through, and that would almost to be expected having a larger sensor. So having a smaller sensor on the Trisio with a higher megapixel count means that the photo sites will be smaller than those on the Ricoh Theta Z1, so color could sacrifice a little bit. But the bloom was much worse when we take a look at the Ricoh Theta Z1. We'll rotate over here to the dining room. We can see this got pretty good results. Here are our little tiny side yard over here. We can see that the colors though are better on the Ricoh Theta Z1. When we take the Trisio and we rotate around to the dining room, those colors are a little bit flat. But look how sharp it is. That's very, very sharp. If you take this yourself, like I said, with that link, open it up in a browser, and you'll be able to then compare, and you'll see that yes, we lost a little bit of green, but it's still green. It's not desaturated, and it is sharper. Once again, let's go back to the Ricoh Theta Z1, spin around here to our dining room. You can see everything's just a little dull, a little muddy, just not quite there. So not the best, especially when we come around here, and this was getting close to a stitching line, and everything turned just really, really super soft on when we go to the Ricoh Theta compared to the Trisio. So the Ricoh Theta here is just super hazy, super foggy around here, where the Trisio did a much better job and was definitely a lot sharper in those areas. Just overall, it did seem to be much sharper than the Theta Z1. So if you were to compare apples to apples, if you were wanting to do just a simple virtual tour, you didn't want to do any editing, you wanted to get in and out, this wasn't going to be a high-priced 360 virtual tour, the Trisio is winning out here when it comes to quality. Once again, real quick, the Theta Z1, we can take a look then at the Trisio, and I encourage you also to take a look at those results for yourself. Now comes the question though of when we want to compare the Trisio to a DSLR. So using the DSLR method here, once again, this was using that setup of a DSLR. It was a Nikon D610 with a Samyang 12mm f2.8 fisheye on it, on a Nodal Ninja pano head. So it's definitely a different investment when we get into this. For instance, if you were to go this DSLR route, which will give you higher quality, you're going to have a higher price. I'll break that down and how that compares to Trisio in just a second. First, let's look at some of the results. This was just a 3-shot HDR image. So what I did was I took 4 shots around. Each one of those had to be 3 frames, so 12 shots total. And then those had to be HDR'd in Photoshop. I could have used some other software, but I just used Photoshop. And then those images, the 4 images that were HDR'd together, then had to be stitched in PT GUI. After that, they then had to have final edits applied back in Photoshop. So a more involved workflow, even though the shooting time was probably about the same, because once again, I was just rotating 4 shots around. But here we can even see that there is still a little bit of purple fringing, but not as bad when we get up here around these windows. Now, I did shoot this in RAW, and I could have done some better adjustments on chromatic aberration, but you can even see there was just so much sun coming in here that it was almost hard to get rid of all that. But being RAW files, I could have taken that a little bit further to process more of that chromatic aberration and fringing out of it. When we take a look around, we can just see that everything is sharper using a DSLR, and that's what we'd expect. Moving over here, we've got some weird kind of HDR results. We don't get the bloom that we saw in both cameras, but we also have a lot of glare on the floor that would need to be edited somehow. Moving around here to the dining room, very bright, very sharp, looking pretty good, but that's what we'd expect from a DSLR for the color and the quality and all that. But once again, this is a more involved editing workflow and a higher price. Remember, the Trisio costs you about $400, and that's going to get you this type of 360 image. If you use the Z1, you're going to have to pay $1,000, and you're going to get, doing apples to apples once again, you're going to get a lower quality image. If you do a DSLR and you get the higher end result for this, you will need to spend for a DSLR or a mirrorless camera at least $1,000 for a body easy, and that's even getting a used one. The lens would be about $350, let's say. Pano head, I was using a Nodal Ninja, which is about a $500 head, but you can also pick up some pretty good ones for about $150. But either way, just for the gear alone, without the tripod, we're talking about a $1,500 minimum investment for the gear, plus then you have to buy PT GUI, and then you also have to invest more in the editing time. Now, as far as quality then is concerned, when we talk about the final images, the Trisio came in really well. And once again, as mentioned earlier, it has 8,000 by 4,000 pixels. When we look at the Theta Z1, it has 6720 by 3360 pixels. And of course, the DSLR wins out really high at 13,000 pixels by over 6,000 pixels wide. So it really depends on what you're going to be doing for a virtual tour. If you're going to be doing a high-end virtual tour where expectations are extremely high, yes, using a DSLR, even just HDR, or like I show in some of the videos, incorporating flash to have amazing results. It's a more time-consuming process. You will get higher quality, but it's not for everything. So for a lot of standard real estate virtual tours, sometimes the portable camera works best. Back in my book on virtual tour photography, I did talk about the Theta Z1 using exposure blending and then out of the raw files. But for something very efficient, the Ricoh Theta just doesn't hold a candle really to the Trisio Lite 2. The Trisio Lite 2 has a much better result for this type of camera, and also you could buy two of these Trisio Lite 2 cameras for less than what you'd buy a Ricoh Theta Z1 for. Now there was some concern that I had that since it did have to rotate on a motor that's built into it, what would we worry about warranty? And I did reach out to Trisio, and they do have a 1-year warranty on their cameras. So when we're taking a look at an investment of just $400 even for the camera, that's really not bad for doing your everyday run-of-the-mill virtual tours using the Trisio, especially since there's really no stitching or editing involved. This is just straight out of camera, no enhancements. Same with the Ricoh Theta Z1. So if you need something for simple virtual tours, then yes, the Trisio would work out, be the one that I would recommend. If you wanted to do some exposure blending and you wanted to shoot in RAW and you wanted to do that with luminosity masking and the advanced techniques that I show without using flash, then the Ricoh Theta Z1 would be probably a good alternative. But once again, you're starting to delve into the realm of using DSLRs. At that point, you might want to experiment with then using a DSLR to get those better type of results and then eventually incorporate flash. But for probably about 90% of the real estate listing market, the Trisio Lite would do a very good job. So it's not necessarily a camera for everybody. It depends also on what you're doing. The thing is, for a lot of real estate virtual tours, if they're not really going to be paying you a lot of high dollar for it, then sometimes it's best just to use HDR right out of one of these cameras. You can do it with the Theta Z1, but that's going to cost you a lot more. A camera like this, when we're talking about just, $400 or so compared to $1,000 off the Theta Z1, you can buy a couple of those Trisios and have a backup around just in case. I've got links once again to the Trisio Lite 2, to the results. All that stuff is down in the description for this video. Anyways, I hope you like this review. I hope you like this video and that you can possibly use some of this or other techniques similar to this in your photography as well. If you did like this video and you want to see more, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. It won't cost anything. And as soon as one of these videos is posted, you'll be the first to know. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, take care, be safe, and get out there and shoot something.